Everything was perfect. Not a single dust particle was on her shoes. Her hair was soft as silk, and her posture was full of grace, which also supported her image. But still, she did not know what 14-year-old girls usually draw. Suddenly she remembered that she had been in front of the camera all the time and looked over to see a smiling woman who looked very happy, which meant that she was going to have a delicious dinner tonight. Suddenly, one of the women approached her and asked her what was wrong and if she was worried at all, to which she assured him that she was just thinking about what to draw, and this answer was enough for him, and so he returned to his duties happily. While everyone around her was busy, the heroine realized that she felt like a doll. There seemed to be a lack of props. The hostess and the nobles were incredibly kind, and she was sitting in the center of the room as the main clown. But she did not understand how it all came to this. From the very beginning, the heroine believed that she was only dreaming because the area seemed completely alien, probably because of the novel she had read before going to bed, and because of the beautiful scenery of the city. Her feet began to move along the streets without thinking about anything. Suddenly, a woman grabbed her, angrily calling her Fredia, and in an angry voice she asked where this lazy girl had gone. She hadn't even completed her errands yet, and was already walking around, and she thought that this warning would be enough. But it seems she was wrong. In the end, the girl was left with a mop in her hands and a shocked expression on her face. She couldn't understand what had happened because she was named after the thief of the book. The novel was called The Suspicious Princess. It was a work about a modern girl who got into the body of an orphan named Fredia. The heroine reminded us that she had appeared in the story when he was reaching the orphanage, and then she didn't pay attention to it all and thought it was amazing. She just glanced at the pages, but the details were so vividly depicted, and she had a very rich imagination. So she threw away the mop and just decided that it was all a dream, and therefore she could do whatever she wanted. The girl realized that when she woke up, she would still be in a harsh reality, although she would really like to escape from there. But the next day, it became clear that she was not really asleep. And after a little thought, she suddenly realized the whole situation, and she was now really following the fate of the heroine of that novel, as an ordinary orphan who was thrown out into life when she came of age, from an orphanage without any support. And when she turned 21, she barely managed to make ends meet, trying to survive almost every day, without any hope for a happy future. But now everything was different, and she knew that she now had the universe of this novel in her hands, and she could not have dreamed of a more perfect escape from her horrible world. The heroine was happily running around the room, enjoying this world, and thanking the heavens for allowing her to start everything from scratch, when suddenly she began to remind herself what the ending was like. Fredia was adopted almost immediately after the soul of another person was transferred into her body. The only problem was that her new parents were cruel nobles. She herself has always followed the path of goodness, and this provoked conflicts with many villains, but still managed to defeat them, after which the girl had a wedding with the crown prince. This news turned the queen against her, as a result of which the cousin of the crown prince wounded the heroine, but she would later ascend to the throne and enter public policy. For her now, all this sounded like a big hassle, and then the heroine decided that it would be good to escape from here while she could still do it. But first, she had to solve the job. Since she already knew the full story, earning money should not be a problem. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by a woman who again shouted at the heroine, asking what she was doing here, since it had been several hours since she started doing it, and she still couldn't finish. The woman, exhaling heavily, said that she should have guessed where this was going right away, after a few requests to take a nap and rest, and therefore she couldn't continue like this. And so she threatened the heroine that if she didn't come to her senses, she would be sold, right to Mr. Garmel's farm. And at that moment, she remembered who he was. It was that disgusting uncle who sold fruit, and she was going to be given into the clutches of that pervert, which scared her very much. But after the fear came anger, because she was thought of as an animal that could be disposed of at any time, and so the girl made a rather unexpected move, suddenly grabbing the owner's leg and begging her not to sell her, saying that from that day on she would put twice as much effort into her work. Now she realized that she had been working in a similar way, not worse than a slave at the orphanage, and also acting as an icon of suffering, trying to attract the attention of the rich so that they would donate more money to the orphanage. Her thoughts were again interrupted by a richly dressed man who said it was beautiful, like a diamond, and then asked what she dreamed of, and the girl said uncertainly that she wanted to become a landowner, but corrected herself after a moment, adding that it would be nice to become a famous artist. At this point, the hostess intervened, assuring him that her wish could soon become a reality, which is why she thanked the man. And a moment later, in a quiet voice, she said that she hoped that every corner of the world would hear about his generosity, despite the gossip, to which he assured her that she would not be able to do without help, and therefore handed over 2 bags of gold, assuring him that this was a modest gesture of gratitude. Later, the 3 of them appeared in a newspaper with the caption, "Girl receives valuable support," above them, a miracle that happened to a poor orphan named Fredia. Now she and the rest of the children will finally have their wishes fulfilled, thanks to the free sponsorship of an uncle. Reading this article, the heroine was very angry. They turned a criminal into a philanthropist. And all this just because of a bribe at the moment, washing dishes in dirty clothes. The words about making her dreams come true sounded very funny. She was now working just like a cleaner, while the lady spent money on all sorts of luxurious things, and she was fed only once a day, which made her realize that it was not far from starving to death. Therefore, the girl firmly decided that it was time to act, and she had to escape from the shackles of slavery at any cost, and at that moment she was called, to which she obediently agreed. Already at the market, she was looking at the list of things to do. She needed to replenish the food supply and also pick up clothes from the atelier, at which point she felt uneasy, because for some reason she was given an easy job, and the lady was surprisingly polite, so it could be a good chance to escape. While she was thinking about all this, she was suddenly approached by children who said that she was a miserable orphan, and that it must have been hard without her parents, and that adults were already laughing at them, even though they asked her not to mock them. At that moment, she realized that the mistress had set her up and deliberately sent her to the market so that people would mock the heroine, and now she could not escape the unwanted attention. Other teenagers took the initiative and joined the people, saying that she was paid for her drawings, and this was too luxurious a hobby for a shameful homeless person. The heroine just kept silent, realizing that bullies were the same regardless of place and time, the same as in her past life, and not reacting now was the best option, when suddenly a small stone flew at her, and the other teenagers started laughing out loud. After that, they started discussing among themselves what else they could throw at her, which angered the heroine, and she asked them to stop doing it, but no one listened to her. And then they threw all kinds of garbage at her. She began to cover herself with her hands, but realized that nothing was falling on her. And opening her eyes, she thought that this time she had been lucky. But then she saw a young man who covered her, and he said that having close people did not guarantee good manners, and the girl suddenly felt a strange sense of anxiety coming from this guy. The guy started laughing, then asked if they were not going to run away yet. And in response, the 2 teenagers who had already pulled out a knife asked him uncertainly who he was, but he had no intention of answering, and with a menacing face said that even if they knew, nothing would change. The angry attackers immediately rushed to attack, but the defender was not confused and successfully managed to intercept the dagger, and then threw it back at them, and it flew so close that it managed to scratch the attacker. After that, he briefly ordered them to get out of his sight, and that he would not even see them again. Otherwise, things could end up worse. The intimidation was successful, and the 2 thieves fled in terror, not forgetting to threaten that they would return. After finishing, the heroine hesitantly thanked him for his help, when suddenly he turned to her, making her lose the gift of the thing, and the guy asked why she was standing like a pillar, adding that she couldn't even stand up for herself, a real shame, and next time she shouldn't hide behind others, but accept the challenge with dignity and fight back. At night, in her bed, the girl couldn't sleep. She couldn't get that situation and that person out of her mind. He looked very confident, but she couldn't remember if there was a similar passage in that novel. Maybe he was just a second-rate passerby who didn't even have a name, although he had an aura like the main character, but she had no idea. Maybe her adoption was a ticket to a better life. but for some reason her soul was so scared. Suddenly, with a firm determination, she stood up, assuring herself that she had a chance given to her by God, and therefore she needed to join the Duke's family, where she would have various benefits and then win the love of the prince. Otherwise, she would not be able to enjoy luxury, and therefore she could move on to Plan B, and from now on she would become an aristocratic blood. A few days passed, and the landlady came to her room to see if she was ready, and after receiving confirmation, she turned to her, telling her to listen carefully, as she did not intend to repeat herself twice, and therefore today she should behave well and watch her behavior while smiling fearfully. And the girl agreed, assuring her that she had nothing to worry about, although she understood that there was a reason for this nervousness, as the queen herself would soon honor this shelter with her visit. And when she appeared, the girl bowed politely, assuring her that it was a great honor to meet her, to which the woman patted her head and said that she was very beautiful. This impressed the heroine. She did not expect such acting skills. Queen Ioana was known for being stingy for herself, but generous to others. But behind her kind smile was actually a very cold personality. In the novel, she was shown as a rather ruthless lady who was ready to sacrifice her child for power and money without hesitation. And in the end, she preferred the older prince, and so she stayed with him. Herz Allen von Arcel, the protagonist, who was so moved by the article in the newspaper that he came to see her personally. He didn't look angry, and when he looked at her, he started smiling very sweetly. And from this smile, the girl blushed, and suddenly realized that she had fallen in love at first sight. After a moment of calming herself down, she decided that it could have been because of the plot of the book. But in general, now this feeling was like before, when she was protected by that guy. But still she pushed these thoughts away, not believing in such a thing. Still looking at the prince's smiling face, she suddenly realized that it was probably the hero of the novel. Later, they had a moment to talk, and the guy apologized for his behavior, assured her that it was not on purpose, then asked if she was Fredia, assured her that he had read about her in the newspaper, and it said that she wanted to become an artist. The heroine suddenly fell silent, realizing that he had started asking her about her alleged dream, although she had lied then. And this was the worst possible scenario, so she had to immediately shift the dialogue to another direction before he started interrogating her. Suddenly, she asked him for permission to share something, and having received it, she said that today in the mirror she noticed that her hair was quite light, namely because she was blonde. That's right. After these words, the puzzled prince could not say anything, and the heroine turned around, realizing that she could not start laughing now, otherwise she could be accused of insulting the royal person. Turning around, Fredia saw that the aristocrat took these words seriously and began to think about them, which shocked the heroine, and mentally prayed to stop thinking about the fool. And so she suddenly asked if he had breakfast today. After a moment, he smugly asserted that she had eaten soup with bread and it was very tasty, but seeing no reaction from him, she decided that her diploma was too much even for him. In a moment, Fredia was blaming herself for getting too excited, but she tried not to show it, although she was already experiencing a lot of different emotions, mostly negative ones, when suddenly the guy started laughing, saying that she was very funny, and in a moment he was apologizing again for not being able to hold back his laughter, because her manner of communication was very funny. And at that moment she realized that he was much more eccentric than she was. After she finished with the important guests, she returned to her usual way of life, but she couldn't get the prince out of her mind. And his strange behavior, it was very easy to win the favor of this guy with whom luck had tried so hard to bring her together. He was happy about everything, and he behaved quite risky, as if they were there all alone. The first meeting was similar to what was described in the novel. The protagonist, shocked by the prince's kindness according to the canon, immediately fell in love with him. But now she realized that he was a nice guy, but in any case, she was able to arouse interest in her side. And so the events went according to the script. And besides, the picture of them smiling at each other had already been released in the newspaper, which meant the antagonist's imminent arrival. There were days when she was dressed in beautiful dresses, though not for a holiday. And then she received a lot of attention from the orphanage's caregivers. And even though she was small then, she understood why their attitude changed dramatically. Her childhood was completely spent in despair. The heroine constantly tried to prove to the visitors how good she would be for the family, and of course she was left behind without success. At that moment, she saw the carriage arrive and firmly decided that now she could not let the chance she had been given escape. Again, standing in front of the big door, the girl tried to put aside all sentiment because the plot of the book had already decided her fate, arranged a meeting with the Duke, but for some reason the excitement inside her could not subside. She knew that it was time to rewrite history from scratch. She should just play along with her new dad until she was of age, and after creating a marriage contract, she should just run away. And this thought warmed her, so she gathered her strength and knocked. Inside, the hostess immediately asked the girl to greet the guest who was already waiting for her. It was Duke Weiss, Ivan Weiss, who helped his distant relative Ioana to come to the throne. But he did not stop there and wanted to marry someone from the family to the prince. But still, his only daughter was expected to become the head of their family in the future. So he needed another girl, and here she was. Because an orphan without money can be easily fed, he created a tool to achieve his goals. The man immediately asked the hostess if the girl was smart, and she assured him that she was the smartest in their house. And the heroine continued to smile, realizing that he was disgusted to speak to her directly, but she was not going to let herself be ignored so easily. So the girl turned to the Duke, shocked the adults, and then said that she was very happy to meet him, and she still could not believe that today she would get a family. She had heard that he already had a daughter. The aristocrat confirmed this, added that she was now 15, and apparently they were the same age, and the girl, smiling defiantly, said that she was a year younger, but still wanted to make a gift for her, showed her a beautiful ribbon. The heroine claimed that it was given to her by the eldest prince when he came to visit. At first, she was going to give it to him, but later realized that jewelry would not be of any use to him. But maybe at least her future sister would be happy with it. It was the only treasure at her disposal. Looking slyly at the child, the Duke asked why, in this case, she would share such a thing with others, to which Fredia, already in a cold tone, assured him that she believed it was worth sharing valuable things with people she cared about, simply because she had dreamed of her parents forever and had nothing more important than her family. After that, smiling again, the heroine assured that if she was accepted, she promised never to be evil and not to demand luxury. The man, in turn, evaluated her sincerity for a moment longer, and then said that it was commendable. If she was not lying, then she would get everything she needed. And therefore, extending his hand, he asked her not to be greedy in the future, and then she would be happy. Fredia, who never tried to jump above her head, and besides, this jewelry did not belong to her, of course. She should not have given it away so easily. But it would have been better to listen to her intuition, as the Duke immediately understood the gesture. After a moment, he began to smile and said that the girl was smart beyond her years, to which the new child thanked him for the compliment. He preferred prudence to ignorance, at which point the shocked hostess did not intentionally squeeze the heroine's shoulder, and the man assured her that the hostess really did not waste time, teaching her children properly. The girl was as shocked by these words as the owner, as she knew that this animal only knew how to scream and oppress children. And the woman blushed at the compliment and confirmed that she had tried to take care of each of the children, and from now on she would try twice as hard. At this point, the girl finally got tired of it, so she decided to change her plan so as not to give anything to the Karza, and so she defiantly pulled away from the woman, asking her not to squeeze her shoulder with such force, because she could leave her with a bruise. The woman nervously asked Fredia what she meant, and then taking her by the head and bowing together, she apologized, assuring her that sometimes the child likes to lie, and she tried to teach her that she shouldn't do that, but failed. This only angered Fredia even more, and looking at the principal's nervous laughter, it was clear that she was scared, afraid that he would be told about his behavior towards children, but knew that this was not the end. Suddenly, the orphan apologized, assuring him that she had only imagined it because the lady was blowing dust off them. In response, the Duke asked if their relationship was that strong, and the child pretended to confirm it sincerely. adding that her aunt had allowed her to live on the roof, because not everyone is lucky enough to have a private room. And no matter how much it blows at night and she didn't freeze to death several times, it was great to feel what it was like to be an unlucky fairy tale heroine. After some thought, the guest said that it was unlikely that the lady would lie, and Fredia confirmed this, adding that often the thin, worn blanket seemed like an ordinary pile of straw, which made him fantasize that she was not a knight who sought refuge in the barn, but when the laundry was done. The Duke, tired of the stories, said that this was enough, and then looked at the owner menacingly and noticed that there were several generous donors to the shelter, but now he wondered where their contributions went, and therefore a visit with inspections should be expected. With that, he said that they had to go, so he ordered the servant to prepare the documents, and Fredia, satisfied with her result, realized that the woman was probably just laundering money. But now she got what she deserved, and in a moment, her new father turned to her, saying that there was a carriage in the valley, so she should take her things there, and the adults would decide the rest of the issues. Arriving at her new home, Fredia could not find the words to describe her delight. There was a fountain, and the gate looked like it was made of gold, when suddenly she heard a servant talking to the master, explaining that the Duchess was not well and was suffering from a migraine again, and that Mrs. Isabella was now looking after her. And at that moment she realized that she would be without getting to know his wife. The Duke's wife and daughter were against the adoption of Fredia, which slowly caused a split in the family. And Ivan, without asking anyone, did everything in spite of someone's words, and at that moment she remembered the bad treatment she would receive from others in this house, but still gathered her strength, assuring herself that she would cope. Once inside, the Duke ordered a servant to take the girl to a room, and then went about his business. And Fredia, who realized that Catherine's chambers were in that direction, was approached by a servant who said that this was her room, and what she saw made her cry. The servant saw the crying girl and felt uncomfortable, so he asked uncertainly what had happened, and the heroine assured him that it was too perfect to be true. The room was filled with mold, with a huge heating bill. There were days when she was happy if she didn't see cockroaches at least once a day, and now her hungry past is behind her, and so she was ready to stay here forever. At that moment, the Duke came into the room and also saw the girl wiping her tears, and the servant did not know how to explain it. So he told the truth that Fredia suddenly cried, and he did not know why. And then her father offered her a better room. The heroine assured me that it was not necessary, and she was just too happy, for which she thanked me. She was glad that she now had such a huge bed, her own carpet, huge windows, and this beautiful interior, and even a wardrobe. After that, she took the Duke's hand, and filled with tears of happiness, assured him that she was now forever in his debt. And in a moment, the man blushed and turned away, and the servant could hardly contain his laughter, which surprised Fredia, as she saw no reason to laugh. The next day, she woke up in tears again. Because of how soft the mattress was, she still couldn't believe that this was her room now, and so she was ready to fulfill any of the Duke's whims, as well as to be friendly with the other owners of the house. After a happy awakening, the girl began her morning chores, washing her face, which refreshed her. The cold water was good for waking up, and then she began to dress briskly, when she suddenly heard a knock on the door, so she immediately let herself in. But there was only silence in response, so Fredia decided to check. When she opened the door, she saw a maid coming down the hall, and so she enthusiastically announced that she was already awake and ready to receive guests. But the maid was frightened by this sudden voice, and in a moment she apologized. As she had not thought about it, there was just no sound coming from the room. After that, the heroine asked if it was brought to her for washing, but looking at her red fingers, it was clear that the water was ice cold. And at that moment, Fredia realized that on the first day of the main character's stay at the manor, the maids were joking with her, making her rinse her face with cold water because nobles usually prefer hot water. Most of all, it was the maid Isabella who mocked her. And in the story, she decided to take revenge by getting into long and unpleasant quarrels with her. But now it seemed that her peasant habits prevented this conflict from even starting. At this point, The maid assured her that it was time to wash and get ready for the day, and the girl assured her that there was some water left over from last night, and so she had already washed, and in response, the woman apologized anxiously, demonstratively sad, saying that it was very difficult for her to carry a full bowl of water here. The heroine immediately understood what it was about. It seems she was forced to take a shower with this ice, and in such a case there was no choice but to start a quarrel. So he dipped his finger in the water. She immediately moved away, saying that even in the shelter they gave heated water. Presumably Herzog was saving on firewood, and so the girl asked if they would really mock her with this ice water. The maid said that it was probably because she wore light clothes, so she would bring her some dresses after breakfast, and she would ask Mrs. Isabella for the dresses she no longer wore. Fredia didn't show it, but in her heart she begged her not to disappoint her again, because it was not cool to be mocked like that. And suddenly she realized that this was only the beginning of her stay here. So she asked if breakfast was ready, and was assured that the gentleman was already waiting for her. And then she realized that it was all deliberate. She had been made late, and now it was clear why the knock on the door was barely audible. But this time she was ready to forgive such rudeness, since it was clear that this maid was from the bottom, and she believed that only in this way could she win the kindness of her master. And Fredia, it turned out that a sudden obstacle, and so it was not surprising that she was angry. The girl would have preferred to have a nice way of leaving them, but the Duke would obviously not have liked the extra noise in his house. So she decided to just go with the flow, which is why she started asking the maid to take her to the dining room, as her father was already waiting for her. The aristocrat was already waiting for her there, and her daughter entered, asked him how he slept today, and the man asked her to sit with him at the table, and he was waiting for her to join him for breakfast, and the daughter apologized for that, and her getting ready took a little longer, as she was not used to receiving help. After that, she wondered if anyone else was coming, but the Duke said it would be just them tonight, and Fredia realized that it seemed the others were not eager to meet her, but she didn't worry about it, assuring herself that she would get more in that case. Looking at all this, she was just salivating. She couldn't believe that such a breakfast was planned to be served every day, and after a moment, she turned to the aristocrat with a questioning look, and he assured her that she shouldn't think about manners yet, as it wasn't her fault that she hadn't had the opportunity to learn. In fact, she didn't think about manners, but if he insisted, she wouldn't be shy. And at that very moment, she grabbed hold of the chicken leg and tore it off, starting to chew it right out of his hands. And this shocked the servants and the aristocrat himself, and the happy girl said that young girls can chew stones. Suddenly, Herzog anxiously asked if it was all true, and the owner of the shelter was forcing them to eat stones, to which the girl objected, but corrected herself in a moment and said that to some extent it was true. You could really break your teeth from concrete pieces of bread. Now the servants' gazes were focused on her, and they clearly showed sympathy. So she realized that with outsiders looking in, she needed to pretend harder that this food was wonderful, and therefore she should relax and enjoy it. After that, the Duke addressed her, recalling her words when she said that she was aware of the essence of the attention from the elder prince, in which case he hoped that she knew who was now with her. The girl, after a little thought, confirmed this, calling him Duke Weiss. She had heard that only the emperor himself was higher than him. After that, the man wondered who had told her this, to which Fredia at first wanted to say that it was the author of the novel, but knew that this was not allowed to be said, and therefore assured that she had read it in a book. She already knew how to read, watched others when they learned, and eventually learned something herself. This was a lie in itself. The reason why her basic skills were not lost was because of the writing, which was absolutely similar to the modern times. It was like keeping a secret key to any castle. This was followed by a question about whether she was aware of why she was adopted, and after receiving confirmation, the man asked her to share her thoughts on this, and Fredia, already in a cold voice, said that she had heard that raising a large number of children was a requirement for the highest nobility. While one inherited the title, the rest were used to create connections through marriages. Suddenly, Herzog became even more serious, and on reflection, he asked if she had learned this from the teachers at the orphanage, but received a brief denial, after which she added that life there had still taught her a lot about illegitimate children. often kept alive as insurance. Many who shared her fate actually had wealthy biological parents. They could return to the family if something happened to their purebred siblings, and otherwise, they would continue to grow up there until they were adults. That's why they taught manners to people like her at the shelter. Because she had lived in different places, she immediately noticed it was different from the others, and she immediately understood what was going on there. The man noticed that she was not a smart girl, but he could have sworn he was not her father, and then asked if she knew why she had been chosen. Fredia realized that the Duke would suspect something strange if she said anything else, so she had to play dumb. She could already tell that it had something to do with the older prince. At this point, a servant brought a tray of desserts inside and asked if they had finished with the main course, to which the gentleman asked him to wait until they finished, when suddenly Fredia, fascinated by these sweets, unconsciously said that it must have something to do with the cakes, since the elder prince loved them. After a moment, realizing that she had said too much, she apologized, assuring him that it was just thinking out loud, that he would probably like different sweets, to which the man, holding back his laughter, asked if she meant herself, to which she began to deny, but it was too late, and now she believed that the Duke would definitely think her stupid. Having calmed down a bit, the Duke asked her to try a piece in that case, and the servant put a large piece of cake on her plate, from which the heroine could not take her eyes off. And at that moment the Duke said to himself that, after all, she was still a child. The aristocrat realized that it was not necessary to burden her yet. Let her get used to the etiquette and habits of high society to begin with. And so he hoped that this child would not let them down. Already in her room, Fredia was thinking about him. This man was not so bad. At that moment, a maid came in and addressed the girl, but she did not answer. So the maid woke her up by screaming, and then said that she had brought the clothes. The heroine thanked her, as it was even faster than she thought. But when she saw it, she was surprised, as the dress was a little torn, and so she asked if there was anything else for her, and the maid haughtily said that there was nothing else, and either this, or let her continue to carry what they brought from the shelter, or let her sew it herself. Looking at this dress, the heroine saw a beautiful bow with a precious stone on it, and so she began to seriously consider this option, and therefore asked if she could sew it up herself, to which the woman slyly smiled and assured her that everything would work out, after which she handed over the needles and threads and left, claiming that she had other things to do. Fredia, and she didn't think to be angry or offended, she just wondered if the maid was acting so familiar on her own, or if Isabella had ordered her to, since she didn't remember reading about it in the novel, and there was hardly any point in dredging up what had happened now. And in that case, she had to do what she did best. Fredia prepared herself and started sewing, imagining that she was in a cartoon and had superpowers. But after a moment, she calmed down, thinking how cool it would be to just shout spells like in a cartoon. But still, this world was kind of real, and there was no magic here. But in the end, making clothes had always come easy to her and paid off. Whether it was knitting, sewing, or other such things, she was the master here. The evil maid probably thought that the girl would wear torn clothes, and so it was worth breaking her. The Duke was in his office thinking about his actions. The child was smarter than he expected, as fate would have it. He managed to take the ace from the deck of cards on the first try. Even if she behaved immaturely sometimes, she was not inferior to Isabella, despite the age difference. His only educated daughter, who was unrivaled in her intelligence, usually showed no emotion, but was still more than worthy to inherit his title. As for the next head of the family, her calmness was only a virtue. Teachers often praised her, assuring her that she mastered sciences that were beyond her peers' reach, to which her father, calmly sipping tea, argued that she had to meet the requirements of the heiress. He knew that the girl was capable of much greater things. She was destined to lead their family and spread its influence. At least that's how it was thought, until she announced that she wanted to be engaged to the eldest prince. And it made him very angry. The man did not understand how he had ever allowed his girl to abandon her roots and become part of another family. Even if her love for the prince was real, she was not the kind of person who would let her feelings take over her mind. Once he heard from the queen that she would have been only too happy to have Isabella as her daughter-in-law, and it was all Ioana's fault, who had forgotten that it was the Duke who helped her to the royal throne and now had the audacity to manipulate his daughter. He couldn't let this go on, but he couldn't change Isabella's mind overnight either. So he brought Fredia here, who would easily win the prince's heart. At this point, he turned to the butler and ordered him to ask Isabella to go shopping with Fredia, which surprised the servant. And he asked if the aristocrat wanted the lady to do it herself. He knew that this business would have been more suitable for his wife, but he did not want to stress her anymore. She refused to see both him and Fredia, so he argued that since they were the same age, it would help her to buy the right things, and therefore it was worth letting her do it. At that moment, Herzog recalled how the woman had said that she was categorically against it. She did not understand how a child could be adopted without her permission, and Isabella would not want it either. With these words, she left him no other choice. Fredia, who had finished sewing her new dress and was pleased with the result, suggested that she might be able to become a seamstress when she escaped from here, so it was time to walk the new dress and look around the house. Entering the main hall, she realized that it all looked more like a palace than a manor, and at that moment, the girl constantly caught the eyes of the servants, and therefore it was clear that they were not yet used to her. And Ivan's behavior during breakfast was also strange, and therefore it is understandable he was now in a difficult position to calm Catherine, and at the same time not to forget about the new child, a problem. Walking through the corridors, she was looking at portraits of the family's past heads, when she saw an album with their entire family and was shocked to see a woman, and she was shocked to see how beautiful she was. But one of the photos looked quite strange, when suddenly an angry voice was heard behind her, after which the heroine was grabbed by the arm, and it turned out that it was the same maid, and she claimed that Fredia dared to steal Isabella's dress. The heroine was shocked by this statement, and then claimed that she actually asked not to swear if she changed the dress during tailoring, to which the woman said that she had not given her such a beautiful dress, and in general she tried to find the oldest and torn one. And at this point Fredia was demonstratively surprised that the maid herself had admitted to this. The maid was uncertain, saying that this was not the point, but the girl insisted on talking about it, adding that since she said the oldest one, there were probably other dresses for her. The maid started to get nervous. Fredia noticed this and therefore, making a friendly face, asked her not to cry and to calm down, and she was ready to listen to her. The woman assured her that she had no intention of crying, but the girl continued to insist, asking her to repent of her sins, and this insolence irritated the maid, and so she stated that it did not change the fact that the girl had stolen the dress, and in response, Fredia stated that the woman continued to say so, even though it was the same dress she had been given before, and if she thought it was so stylish, it meant that her beauty was doing its job. The woman was tired of this argument, and so she dragged the child with her and said that they would see if she behaved the same way in front of Mrs. Isabella. They reached the door to the ladies' room, and the maid knocked, asked to come in, and after receiving permission, she dragged the girl with her, which finally irritated her. And so she broke free from her hands and began to scream, hitting the furniture, at which point other frightened maids came up and began to ask what she was doing here and why she was leaving the child like that, since she had been brought by the owner. At that moment, the lady ordered them to calm down, and the heroine saw her, Isabella. But something was wrong, because for some reason in the photo, she had mint-colored hair, and now it was as if it were fiery, as described in the novel. Isabella asked one of the maids to call the family doctor and the other to put her on the bed, and Karen, who did so, ordered her to explain herself, and then turned to the victim and asked her name. And when she introduced herself, the girl came closer and said that she did not like it that one of her maids was so rude to another person, and that she was fully responsible for her subordinate, and therefore asked to be allowed to get a doctor to examine her to make sure that everything was okay. And although Fredia assured her that everything was fine and she shouldn't call anyone, her sister insisted, claiming that it was not just a whim, but her health and her orders, and so heroine had no choice but to agree. Lying down on the bed, she reminded herself that it was she who was described in the novel as the annoying Cinderella thief. She could not recall all the evil deeds Isabella did to the main character. She only remembered that she made her very angry, and when she exploded, it delighted the readers. But now she was only 15, and she could hardly hurt a person from another universe. Fredia tried to pretend to be hurt and play on the aristocrat's feelings, but she was more terrible than she had expected, and therefore did not even know if she could survive the anger of this noble lady. Later, a doctor appeared and examined the victim, and said that nothing was wrong, just a few bruises, and that she should just put some oil on it and everything would be fine. After which Isabella turned to Karen, saying that it was time to explain everything. The woman could not find the words for a while, but then simply pointed her finger at the victim and said that she had stolen her dress, and the maid was trying to take her to the lady, and did not push her at all. Isabella asked the heroine if this was true, and she assured her that she would never dare, and even if she did, the lady was always in her chambers, and she would have been noticed if she had come here. Karen, in her defense, said that she had not given her such a beautiful dress, and Fredia, who asked her to look closely, was given this very dress, saying that it was old and torn. The maid suddenly began to tremble in terror, and this surprised the heroine, as she thought that it was supposed to be an errand for Isabella. But for some reason the maid did not ask for her help, and it was possible that the war between the heroine and her sister was due to a misunderstanding. The heroine decided in this case to test this maid, and therefore claimed that she believed more in the lack of money in this house, as she was forced to sew her own dress due to the lack of workers, and the water was icy due to the lack of firewood for heating, and therefore she decided to sew a dress beautifully so as not to embarrass the Duke. Karen, who immediately began to make excuses, claiming that there had been a misunderstanding and she would never dare to sully her mistress's name, after thinking about Isabella a bit, said that the girl was right, and she had indeed thrown this dress away not long ago, so her sewing skills were really impressive, but she was also good at verbal manipulation. After a moment, the daughter of an aristocrat began to explain that Karen was quite impulsive and made mistakes from time to time, but she was not so stupid as to mock someone for no reason, and the heroine asked if this was a way of saying that she was lying now, but Isabella denied it, as she only wanted to say that she was a great manipulator, and most likely this incident was embellished by her. Such statements made Fredia worried, because the girl sitting in front of her was not at all like the one described in the novel. There was no trace of this superficial, hateful girl at all. In fact, she was very frightening. She went on to say that she realized the fact that Fredia was not so simple, that when she found out that the prince had fallen in love with her, but the fact remained that Karen was not behaving nicely, and so she wanted to apologize for her as a lady, and so she promised that this would not happen again. Fredia realized that an aristocratic lady apologizing to a village orphan for her maid was what people called nobility, but she still had to keep her cool. And so, with a silly expression on her face, the heroine assured her that she didn't need to apologize to her, and she was just glad that this misunderstanding was finally over. In a moment she realized that she had ruined her reputation now, but for some reason Isabella seemed so kind to her, and it seemed that Fredia would become her fan, and therefore she did not want to be an enemy. At the moment, her goal was to connect her sister with the prince, and therefore, addressing her, she said that all the gossip about them was a lie, probably invented by famous gossipers. Maybe he really liked her, but only in a friendly way. So it was absurd that he could fall in love with her after a short conversation. The lady noticed that such a denial usually meant the opposite, and the heroine realized that her words only reinforced suspicions, and therefore, gathering her thoughts, she whispered that she would be arrested for treason if she said that he was not her type. These words could surprise Isabella, and the guest noticed that she was still too young to be interested in boys. She then added that he probably liked Isabella better, as they had been friends since childhood, and when asked how she knew about all this, Fredia assured her that the prince told her all this himself. He was very happy when he talked about her. The girl asked him if he was really talking about her, and the expression on her face showed more fatigue than sincerity. This reaction shocked the heroine. She did not expect this, as she thought she had strong feelings for him. Something was wrong. This girl in front of her was not the same as the one in the novel. After she finished, she said that she had intended to find Fredia anyway, and so it was good that she saw her first. The butler had told her to provide the girl with everything she might need, and she already knew that these requests came from her father, and that it was her father's decision to take the heroines, and she and her mother were against it. The heiress assured us that, to be honest, The presence of another child in the house could be problematic, and Fredia, realizing that she was being advised to stay put, happily assured us that she had nothing to worry about and would live as if she had never been here. She didn't need to eat 3 meals a day, and she could eat in her room. She was used to eating alone since she was a child. Isabella was surprised by this reaction, and therefore assured her that she did not intend to offend her, and she should not go hungry. She did not intend to behave horribly towards her, and if the girl was not ready to live in this house, she would then beg to be kicked out. The aristocrat continued, assuring that becoming a member of this family was not easy for her, excluding the moment of her birth in it, and honestly, she did not belong here at all. After a moment, she turned around and extended her hand to the heroine, asking her to just try to get used to the new place, and then maybe someday she could call her sister. The Duke's daughter began to help the heroine settle in. First of all, she appointed Laya as her personal maid. She had never worked as a maid before, so it was worth taking her with her. It would be better if she lost confidence in other assistants. The two girls got to know each other. It seemed that they were both happy to help each other. The main character believed that the Duke's daughter was behind Karen's actions. At least the book described Isabella as a real evil person, but she was calm and not capable of doing anyone harm. It seems she had enough problems herself. The maid noticed that there was some gossip about the lady that she had heard out of the corner of her eye, namely about her affair with the prince. Laya was delighted with it, and therefore assumed that they had a new age love beginning here, since the gentleman had married Madame. But the heroine knew nothing about it, and therefore asked the maid to explain what she meant. It was another not original story, the love of two hearts. Long ago, there lived in the village a man who inherited the title of Duke that at a young age, after the death of his parents, he was so passionate about managing the estate that when he reached the age of 28, he was still single, although he had influence, wealth, rank, and unearthly beauty. Many young ladies from the capital coveted him, but his heart remained as unapproachable as a rock until a 16-year-old girl who had just come out into the world appeared on the horizon. Or rather, it was the favorite daughter of the Marquis Ludini, a young, ambitious lady who vowed to win the heart of an inaccessible man. In the end, she mustered up the courage to strike up a conversation with him, asking him to waltz, but the man immediately refused. He had no intention of letting a young lady get so close to him, but no one could have guessed that this was only the beginning. The young lady pursued the Duke for 3 whole years, and in the end, she dared to pull off a plan that no other young lady could have done because of her pride. The Marquis was angry that his daughter's choice was 12 years older than her, but in the end, he supported his daughter's choice. And being under constant pressure, he had no choice but to agree to meet with her alone, although he still had hopes of politely refusing the lady's advances. But during the meeting, something unexpected happened that became the reason for their rapprochement, and after that, they began to discuss their future engagement. Thus, the Duke and his wife met each other. It was quite hard for her to believe that the woman would run after her husband, but on the whole, the maid claimed that their lady was very beautiful, and even the gentleman, who was like a piece of ice, melted under her attention. The heroine was not sure if this was possible at all, because in the novel, Catherine was presented as very rude and ambitious, but here she was spoken of as a sweet and charming lady. It seems that Ivan, a devoted and loving husband to his wife, the heroine always thought of him as a cold-blooded and calculating politician who had no feelings for others. And if this was not the case, it meant that Ivan was so eager to test Ioana's influence on his daughter that he adopted her, despite the fact that his wife was against it, and she, in turn, planned to use this family as a means to escape from the orphanage. Upon hearing this story, Fredia remarked that it was very impressive that the maid knew so much, to which she assured her that she was happy to help, and if there was anything else she needed to know, she could always ask her. Laya was the first person who had ever treated her well, except for those who wanted to use her, and so she hoped that they would remain so close in the future. But the closer she got to Fredia, the more influential her position in the estate would become. And so, the girl said in a serious tone that the maid was probably afraid that others would not like her for being her maid, to which the maid asked why she suddenly decided so. and Fredia said that she had become a pain in the ass here, and the mistress did not greet her. And so she asked the maid that if anyone wanted to harm her for this reason, she should just say that she was following orders. She could even gossip if necessary, since no one here likes the heroine anyway, so it's not worth suffering because of her. These words touched Leah, and she, with tears in her eyes, asked not to speak like that, and she promised never to leave her mistress alone. Fredia did not expect such a reaction, and immediately began to calm her maid. Meanwhile, the maid noticed that even Lady Isabella had said that sooner or later she would accept her as a sister, and therefore if the lady recognized her and the Duke loved her, then Madame would definitely recognize her. This was a rather optimistic forecast, and yet the heroine realized that Ivan was just using her, and Catherine would never accept her as her daughter. And it didn't matter whether Isabella thought she was her sister or not, since the Duke would try to set her up with the prince. This competition would drive them apart, and therefore there was no possibility of Laya's desire. She knew that any expectation would bring her pain, so she shouldn't have worked herself up, and the maid meanwhile sincerely asked her not to worry about it, so she should at least pretend to believe it, and so she agreed. Her life before her awakening here was terrible, and she had no intention of repeating it here in this world. She was going to be happy here, no matter what was required of her, and so she would think about her own happiness and love herself for everyone anyway. In this parallel, there is no one who will love her. The next morning, she was again incredibly happy to be in the dining room and to see a huge filled table in front of her. And now she was here all alone. Ivan was not at home, and the others avoided her, so she could eat in peace. When suddenly Isabella came and asked permission to join the table. Seeing her surprised face, the aristocrat asked what had happened and if she shouldn't be here, and the heroine assured her that she hadn't expected to see her here, as she thought she wouldn't want to sit at the same table with her. The heiress flippantly asserted that, if that were the case, she would have easily forbidden her to eat here. And yet she wondered why Fredia thought she would not be welcome here, and so the girl simply claimed that it was her fault, and that sometimes she was silly. After which there was an awkward moment, at the end of which Isabella claimed that she had never avoided her. She was just busy working all the time. The heroine remembered that Ivan had allowed her to eat as she pleased, but she didn't know whether it was possible to behave like that in front of a girl. And yet it was worth a try, taking one of the forks. It looked like it was for a salad, and the smallest one was for the main course. A little later, the aristocrat noticed that the girl had some table manners, and she confirmed this, assuring that she had been taught this in the orphanage, but still not as well as those who were taken into the family of nobles, and therefore she did not know the etiquette of the dining room very well. Isabella was interested in this topic and asked for more details, so Fredia explained that not everyone had the opportunity to study. It could be considered unfair, but many children were orphaned, and only a few managed to find a home, and so people like her should be grateful that they were not just thrown out on the street, and she herself never considered it unfair and never asked for anything more. The aristocrat suddenly fell silent, and when asked what had happened, she hesitantly asked to start eating, assuring him that he would teach her the rules of etiquette, although she should have prepared herself for the difficulty. Suddenly, a servant came into the dining room and said that the Duke had just returned, and the surprised daughter rose, and in a moment said that Fredia should also greet him, after which the two of them met and greeted the Duke, which surprised him greatly. The man claimed that he did not think his daughter would be here. It seems she finally decided to leave the walls of her room. These statements made the girl uncomfortable, after which he asked if her mother did not want to join. But Isabella briefly claimed that she still had a headache. Suddenly the man frowned and confirmed these words, that right now she had a headache. A heavy atmosphere suddenly hung over her, and the heroine assumed that it was all because of her. But the Duke, exhaling heavily, asked her not to feel guilty about it, and therefore invited her to the table. There was silence, and Fredia was the first to break it. So she started a conversation, asking the man how his day was, but he asked her to call him father, like Isabella, which made her flinch, and the heroine realized that everything was going badly. She was not going to call him father until the aristocrat recognized her as a sister. Still, she didn't show it. And as if nothing had happened, she called him father, added that she wanted to ask him how his day was, as hers was filled with joy as always, and then he wondered what exactly brought her joy. So the girl said that Isabella had taught her a lot. Her sister shuddered again, and Fredia noticed it. She didn't understand why this girl suddenly started to get nervous. Maybe she wasn't happy with the fact that her new daughter was getting closer to Ivan, but she immediately rejected this option because she would have immediately expressed herself openly in such a case. So the heroine continued, as if Lady Isabella was taking care of her and told many interesting stories, at which point the Duke himself intervened, noticing that his daughter had changed her mind, to which she replied that it was a short conversation, and she was told to look after Fredia. After that, there was silence again, and the heroine felt uncomfortable again. It was as if they were not so close. After a moment, the Duke asked his daughter what Fredia needed now, to which the girl said that for a start she needed a dress and shoes, some accessories if she wanted. The girl gave her her clothes, but it was not enough, and it was not her size. Fredia took it with understanding. Her sister showed with all her appearance that she did not like her, but still was very attentive to her. After that, her father asked her directly if she needed anything else, and she could not be ashamed of it, because she suddenly realized that she was now being offered to buy as many dresses as she wanted, and at that moment, she could barely control herself. Suddenly, the heroine, with a twinkle in her eye, said she wanted a lot of beautiful outfits. Such directness scared her sister, but her father just laughed at this, cheerfully agreeing, and then asked how much she needed. The girl hesitantly showed 5 fingers, and suddenly there was silence. Fredia already began to think that her father was not happy with so many, and therefore hesitantly added another finger, which made her father laugh, and at that moment she was scared, decided that she was too greedy, and therefore assured that 5 would be enough. Suddenly, an outraged Isabella stood up and loudly declared that she needed at least 15 dresses, and that was only for spring. She would need hats and shoes, as well as several capes, since it was already getting cold. And this statement sent the heroine mentally somewhere in space. Even buying 10 t-shirts was a large amount for her before. But here were dresses, and they were handmade, and it sounded like a lot. And the Duke was very pleased with this answer, and therefore he noticed that she would have to teach the new family member a lot more. After a moment, he calmed down a bit, and turning to Fredia, asked her to listen carefully to her instructions, but still did not insist on being perfect like her, as Isabella was more developed than 5 adults combined. At these words, the daughter blushed, and the heroine happily agreed, although she realized that Ivan seemed to praise his daughter too much, and she could not even think that she would ever see her so red. At this point, the Duke noticed that there had been enough talk, so he asked the girls how they were having breakfast. Fredia assured them that it couldn't have been better. The soup was simply unbelievable. Isabella added that the desserts were even better. At this point, she realized that the situation around her had suddenly become very calm. In fact, he was a foster father who was using her as bait, and a sister who was unwilling to accept. But now it looked like they were a family, and it didn't seem so bad, as long as she wasn't susceptible to it. Pretending to be a family wouldn't be so problematic. Later, Isabella was already in her room, and she could not forget Fredia's words that she was grateful for the roof over her head, and therefore had no reason to be sad. Now she wondered what it would be like to live like this, suppressing her desires and being at peace with herself. It was something she had never experienced. Once upon a time, when she was just a child, her father had told her that she should always keep an eye on the forest, that she should always be attentive, because she would be able to notice that behind the wide foliage there were rotten roots. Some trees might have been cut by strangers. A good leader should be able to notice this, and this forest that was in front of her then, his creation, as he tried to grow it for her, and she should do the same for their family. She should become a better leader than he was. After that, a sea of different responsibilities and expectations came over her, as she was soon to become the head of the family. Her mother said that her father had high hopes for her. Each family trained their heirs differently, and so she had to understand this. She had to bear the weight of the crown to wear it. Her father had no doubt about her success, and so her mother also asked her to continue like this. But the girl was constantly thinking about what would happen if she failed, if she didn't live up to his expectations, if she wasn't smart enough to become the head of the family. and it would be better to give up on herself than to disappoint everyone. And at that moment the queen appeared, saying that she was ready to make her the next queen, that if she became the head of the family, she would have to carry everything on her own. But if she became queen, she could still share this burden with her father, with her, and with other subjects. There was another way to make her family shine, and for example, to become a queen, one of them. When her father found out about it, he was strongly opposed to it, and although her mother explained that she wanted to marry the prince, he asked if he had ever heard her say that before, or if it was her own wishes, in which case she would not be able to inherit the title.
Her bond with Lord Kailecki was constantly growing stronger, and every time the guy spoke, the girl caught herself thinking that she would like to at least get a glimpse of Lord Kailecki.
That her new daughter was getting closer to Ivan, but she immediately rejected this option because she would have immediately expressed herself openly in such a case. So the heroine continued, thinking about Fredia. It was like she really enjoyed talking to her, a strange girl. Maybe you would never know what she was thinking. Even her father was sometimes shocked by her. But still, she had never seen him smile so much, so broadly. In the end, Isabella accepted it. It didn't mean that she liked the girl or anything, but her ignorance about some things was spoiling the family's reputation, at least she told herself, and that meant it was time to roll up her sleeves. Fredia was very happy that it was finally time to go shopping. She was finally alone on the street, and later she was already riding in a carriage, sincerely not understanding why she was not allowed to go alone. And Isabella said that her father had instructed her to look after her, and if she bought something without tasty food, he would not be happy with her. Seeing the sadness in the girl's eyes, her sister asked her to just tell her what she was going to buy, and then they would think about it. And these words immediately lifted Fredia's spirits, and she was delighted to say that she would like to buy something she had wanted for so long. What Fredia wanted was a magic hair dye, a mysterious potion from a sorcerer. It was magical, and could disappear from the hair after a while, and so it was popular among people who temporarily wanted to change their style. Laya told her that Isabella had mint-colored hair in her family portrait, as she used magic dye, and so the heroine now also wanted it very much. The escort was considering this option. Magic dyeing went out of fashion quite quickly, but still there was nothing wrong with it. Already in the city, the heroine bewilderedly assured that she didn't need to buy anything as she just looked there. But it was too late. Isabella started buying everything she looked at for more than 3 seconds. Hats, bows, earrings, a beautiful crystal ball that she didn't even know how to use, cakes, cookies, pies. It was their least waste. Later, they went to another store, and while showing the jewelry to the heroine, the girl asked how she liked it. After which, she once again took absolutely everything in the store. Fredia continued to assure her that she really didn't need it, but Isabella just asked her to be quiet and learn from her example. A member of this family cannot let such a small amount of money upset him. It was their duty to spend the money to the last, and for someone like her, it is a sin to be greedy. The heroine was shocked by this speech. Spending was also a sin for her, but what she was seeing now was incredible. A moment later, her sister was told that they had made delicious cakes, and she asked to pack 5 of each to take with her. No matter how much Fredia convinced herself, it was still too much, and therefore said that it would all end with the leftovers being thrown away. The girl assured them that she didn't understand what the problem was. Since there was food for the servants as well, she intended to share it with everyone, especially after the fiasco they had experienced. It seemed that Isabella really cared about everyone around her. And then she added that the girl, Karen, had scolded her badly, and now she would never try to hurt Fredia again. She could guarantee that. For heroine, this meant that she was now one of those whom Isabella cared about, and this made her very happy. So she asked if she could choose a gift for Laya as well, and her sister had nothing against it. A little later, they went to the salon together and were brought food, and the heroine noticed that she did not know that it was possible to bring food from other places, to which her sister said that it was only because they rented the entire salon for the whole day, to which the girl never tired of being surprised. Isabella assured me that this was inherent in her, that she wanted to see all the store owners focused only on her, a statement that confused the already shocked Fredia, who didn't even understand if they were still talking on equal terms. Exhaling heavily, the aristocrat explained to her that the only people in this country who were higher than their family were the royal family. And she had to remember this forever. Everyone knew about it. The heroine watched this girl with delight and did not understand how she could say such things, never even blinking. A moment later, the owner of the place addressed her, saying that all the preparations were finished, and when they went inside, Fredia was so delighted that she could not find words. Everything was so beautiful, she could not believe that she was allowed to choose something here. And her sister, meanwhile, was thoughtfully choosing something suitable. After a moment, Isabella began to point to the dresses she would take, then began to point to the shoes, each pair in a different color, then pointed to one more for her personally, as she did not want anyone else to have them. The heroine asked if the Duke would mind if they bought all this, to which Isabella said that he asked her to call him father, so she asked if she was only obedient to him, and as soon as she turned away, she would start ignoring his orders. In other words, she made Fredia feel guilty and apologize. After a moment, a little shyly, the girl said that from now on she could call her sister, since they already called the same person father, but addressing her as Mrs. began to get on her nerves. And so, of course, as soon as Fredia got used to everything, she would get used to it.